Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Free Agent Podcast. Super lucky today. Got Shawnta Hooks. Shawnta, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me today. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, now this topic is super interesting to me. It's all around mindfulness, being present, and also too, you hear about the flow state. What the heck is the flow state? How do you get into a state of flow? And how do you utilize it? So I think this is super interesting topic and super topical. A few moments ago we were talking about COVID, and I feel like mindfulness has been really interesting over the last 3 to 5 years. But even within the last year to 6 months, it's like exploded, and there's this huge market just around it. And that's why I'm so interested to talk to you, because you're like an ex CPA, VP, like turned mindfulness and meditation consultant, and you even have your own company and your own brand. So CEO of Mindful Culture Creators, and that's trademarked, by the way. People, don't try to steal it. Let's talk a little bit about you. Like, how did you get into this space? Like, where'd you find the passion? And what are you trying to accomplish with your consultancy?
Yeah. Let me see if I can get this down to like 2 minutes. This 2 minute story of this interesting journey, which really began with me starting out my career in accounting. I majored in accounting and started my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers doing public accounting, and I say that to say I am a very logical, analytical, thinker, very numerical. And mindfulness and meditation was not something that I understood nor really believed in up until about maybe 5 years ago. And the catalyst for that, it actually makes sense because I have a 5-year-old son. So
Okay.
it makes sense that
You
around
almost
that
lost your
time,
mind and you had to say there's got to be a
exactly,
better way.
exactly. Having a child is a very transformative experience. And it brought out the best in me. I wanted to be my best self. I changed my diet. I started to do yoga. I started to take walks in the park, things that the softer side of life I tapped into. And that was sort of my entry point into practicing mindfulness, along with my father, who actually practiced meditation pretty consistently through his martial arts training. He was a professional kickboxer.
Oh,
But even that didn't sway me into believing that it was something I could, use in my life. Until life started to get hard. I had my son, wasn't meditating at the time, but was, just thinking about these things more intentionally. And I was promoted into a new role where I was VP of transformation. So my job was to automate and identify automation solutions for manual processes. And, automation AI is a big topic right now that still frightens people. So if you could imagine the transformation leader coming into town, letting people know that their processes are going to be automated, they are afraid. And so that was a very challenging job, extremely stressful, not to mention an environment that was not very healthy. A lot of toxicity, a lot of microaggressions. It was the first time in my career that I really felt true sort of discrimination and racism in my department. And so I needed something, and mindfulness kept coming up. At that time, mindfulness was starting to experience its sort of like pop culture moment where
sure.
it was starting to be everywhere. And this is pre-COVID, actually about 6 months before COVID. And I just started to, tap into it, watch a video here and there on YouTube and try it out. And at first it was a struggle. I was one of those people that said, I can't do this. This isn't for me. I don't believe in it, until I watched the thing. Right. Everyone has that thing that they saw, that thing that they read, and it finally clicked. Right. And it clicked because I finally understood the definition. Mindfulness is paying attention on purpose to the present moment with an attitude of non-judgment. And so really being able to, put that in relatable terms, take the mysticism out of it for a moment and just see it for what it is, helped me to understand why I need like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I understand why at my job, where my mind is always in a constant state of worry because I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think that my ideas are bright enough. I need something to bring me out of that fear, out of that past thought or that potential future worry and into the present moment. And mindfulness is the tool that helped me do it. And so I just started doing it, and I made it a part of my lifestyle within like a 6-month period, just in time for COVID. And COVID hit, obviously March of 2020. And by that time I was meditating every single day. I was practicing Qigong, which is a form of Tai Chi, and really understanding energy in a way that was not only helping me in my personal life and helping me to deal with COVID, but actually helping me in my job. I was identifying solutions to problems that I did not see solutions before. And so I just started to talk about it. I started to share, how I got into it, share my story. share my father's story. And I started to do it in more larger and larger forums to where I created a community that started with 5 employees at the bank that I was working for at the time. Started with 5 employees and grew within around 12 months, grew to 500 employees. And I was hosting live mindfulness sessions and hosting practice sessions up to 3 times a month. And word kind of got out that I was the mindfulness person, and teams, technology teams and finance teams were reaching out to me saying, hey, you know, our team is dealing with a problem. And I hear that you know how to explain this in a way that we can attach the solution to our problem with this method. So I started to do that. I started to take problems and explain how mindfulness could be a solution to that problem. And eventually it was like, I could do this. I love doing this. This is like my favorite thing to do. I want to do this outside of these 4 walls of this organization. And so that's how, that's the inspiration of how I created my company, Mindful Culture Creators.
That's awesome. You know, I was going to ask you a question about what did mindfulness look like 5 years ago, but you kind of answered that. It was interesting, especially, you know, with my buddies, like, you know, 5 years ago, mindfulness would have been like, oh my gosh, you're meditating. Like, what are you doing? And now, like, after COVID and where we are now, I feel like it's much more accepted and it's much more needed. And it's so easy to have these negative thoughts. I mean, we were talking about before the podcast started, like, you know, we're both entrepreneurs, and it's really easy to get in your own way and have a negative thought process and not see the positive side. And I feel like mindfulness can really help you find your center and get away from those negative thoughts, which is really interesting. But while you were talking about meditating, and I was thinking to myself, you know, well, I don't really meditate, but I think I have my own kind of means of mindfulness. Like for me, taking a walk with the dog and like listen to a podcast, book on tape, or even music, to me, that's a way to break free from the day-to-day, the negativity, and find my center and my chi, if you will, in order to get back and get productive. And I'd love to get your opinion on that specific example. Like, is mindfulness kind of in the eye of the beholder? Because I've never thought of it in that perspective until you were just talking. But to me, I guess maybe I am going through my own mindfulness journey, just not through meditation, through other means.
Yeah, congratulations for that aha moment, because that is exactly what I try to teach people. The number one thing that I've heard, and I've talked to probably around 10,000 people at this point around this topic. And the number one thing that people think is that they can't meditate or they are not mindful. And by definition, it's just not a true statement. Again, mindfulness is paying attention on purpose with an attitude of non-judgment. And so when you synthesize it that way, when you think of that definition, that means that, yes, you are being mindful in other areas of your life. Every time that you are practicing doing one thing at a time with your full attention, you are being mindful. Meditation is sort of the practice. It is the formal environment that you set aside for yourself to be intentional about practicing mindfulness. And it is true that many people don't have that as a formal habit. However, if you are into fitness, if you are into art, if you are an entrepreneur and you are performing tasks, you know, with your full attention, understand that neurologically, the brain doesn't know whether or not you said, I'm going to sit down and actually do a meditation, or if you said, I'm going to put all of my focus and attention on this one thing. Music is actually an amazing entry point to mindfulness and meditation. And it is the tool that I like to use the most to teach. Because, you know, traditionally, when we think of practicing meditation or practicing mindfulness, we think about our breath, right? We think about listening to our breath or even listening to our thoughts.
Slowing down, some box breathing, right? Just like
right. Yeah. Breathing techniques and things like that. And for many people that don't meditate, or especially for people that don't think they can, that can be tough, right? Because you've already told yourself that you can't do it. However, music is something that most of us listen to on a daily basis. And so you can take a song that you really enjoy, that, you know, and preferably something positive, right? You take that song and you make that the form of your meditation. And what I mean by that is every now and then, I encourage people to take a song that they love and put their headphones on, because it's really important to sort of close off a portion of your outside environment, and even close your eyes and just listen to that, say, 4 to 5 minute song with your full attention, right? Yeah. And when you do that, you'll notice certain instruments. You'll notice different ways that the vocalist, you know, expresses the lyrics, if the song has lyrics. And then you can actually apply that to your work. So, you know, you mentioned flow states, right? And though that's the state of mind where you're just really in the zone, where you're really locked in and you're performing at a high level. Music is an excellent tool to use to get into flow states. For that reason, neurologically, the brain sort of relaxes, right? And so you want to, in that case, you want to choose specific types of music that will allow your brain to be at a state where you're relaxed, but you're still focused. And so there's certain types of music that are good for that. Techno music is actually one. Jazz music is another, and really anything that is an instrumental, so that you don't get distracted by the lyrics. It's good if it's a song that you're not really emotionally attached to, just something that's neutral, that allows you to sort of calm your mind and get into that state of relaxation and focus. Because when those two meet, that's your flow state.
Very, very interesting. And I want to circle back to this flow state and kind of maybe connect full attention with flow state, because giving somebody your full attention is really difficult. I kind of, I've been an entrepreneur for 6 years, and it about a year or two in, I realized that I'm super distracted, and so I took off, like I turned off all notifications from my email. If I'm working on something specific, my phone's off. Like for this podcast, my phone is literally off and in another room. And so I found that's really helped me personally be attentive. Also, too, my team knows that if I'm having a conversation with somebody, and if they're on a call, don't text me. Like, don't try to distract me, because it's really important to stay focused. Are there any other tools? And again, I think that's a good segue into flow state as well, because that probably leads into it. But are there any other tools that people can maybe adopt and adapt that would help them kind of give people their full attention, or give a task their full attention when they're working on it? I mean, is it just about closing off outside distractions, or is there something else you can do to get locked in? Because I've heard it takes 15 minutes to get focused, and anything can mess you up. And I'd love to hear your opinion on whether or not you even agree with the 15-minute rule.
Yeah, no, I think that's just probably, I think that can vary, but I want to really emphasize what you said about being intentional about removing distraction. Right. That's what you said, in terms of moving your phone to another room. That's what you're doing. You're eliminating a potential distraction risk. And so because I have a risk management background, I like to think of things in terms of risk. The risk that you have, the goal is a flow state. The risk is distraction. Right. And because we know that our phones are a distraction, our notifications are a distraction, right?
Distraction in my life.
Exactly. You have to be intentional about that. And many people don't do that. It seems really, really simple. And I can only speak for myself, right? I don't always turn my phone off. I don't always put my phone in another room when I need to be locked in. And I am allowing the distraction to happen. And yes, there's plenty of studies that say once you're distracted, it takes X amount of time or minutes to get refocused. And so you're constantly repeating that cycle. That is inefficient. And so step one to achieving a flow state is definitely be intentional about eliminating distraction, calm the mind from the fear that you're going to miss out on something, because that's one of the reasons we don't do that. We have some sort of FOMO that we're going to miss a call, we're going to miss a ping, we're going to miss this thing. And we have to be able to see the truth from fiction. Right. And so that's step one. And step two, there are lots of different ways, but a couple of techniques that I like to use. One is, and I have this sitting next to me, my jump rope. So when I want to get into flow state, oftentimes what I'll do is I'll grab my jump rope and I just start jump roping, because jump roping is a synchronistic activity, right? If you think about it, you have to time your feet with your arms and with your body. It's an activity that brings me center. Right. And while I'm jump roping, sometimes I'll say certain affirmations like, I can solve this problem. I can do this. I can get through this report. Right. And just like 60 seconds. Like, we're not talking about a long, arduous task. Athletes do this all the time. Men do this a lot. Right. They'll just stop what they're doing and break out into push-ups. Right. Yep. So really, this is a way of getting your blood flowing, getting your mind locked in. And so having, that at your fingertips, obviously meditation, right? Meditating before you do a task that you need to focus on is a really, really good technique. And again, meditating doesn't mean a 60-minute, meditation in the forest somewhere. It can be, literally just sitting still. You don't even need a sound. You don't need a guided app. You don't need a thing. You just sit wherever you are, you stop, and you can set a timer, because the mind, for a new meditator, 5 minutes or even 60 seconds could seem like 60 minutes, right? So you set a timer for 60 seconds up to 5 minutes, and you just sit and you allow your thoughts to come and go like the clouds in the sky. One thought will appear and then eventually it will move on, and you notice it, and you just practice that, and that'll help you lock in. The last thing I'll say, to really get into flow states, like I mentioned before, sound. is really, really important to me. So I have a playlist. I actually keep a playlist. And I call it flow state music. And I'm a big hip hop person. So my flow state playlist includes instrumentals of some of my favorite hip hop songs. So Tribe Called Quest. I have a couple of
yeah,
yeah, I
absolutely.
have a electric relaxation, to be exact. I mean, think about it, electric relaxation. Even the name of that song kind of sort of invokes this idea of focus or activity, yet relaxation. And again, that's what flow state is. It's where we are hyper focused, yet we are also relaxed. We're not panicking. And so I've on YouTube, you know, you can just search instrumental of your favorite song. And sometimes there are content creators that'll extend it. So instead of it being a 5-minute track, it's actually a 60-minute track. And so you don't have to do anything. You just put that track on for 60 minutes and it'll just play on a loop for 60 minutes. And that allows you to actually sort of kind of have a time tracker for yourself. Like
Right.
when that goes off, you can celebrate the fact that you were locked in for at least 60 minutes without distraction, because you put your phone away, you got your blood flowing, you centered your mind with a couple minutes of meditation, and you put on sounds that allow you to get into that state of relaxation meets focus.
That's super interesting. You know, I like that you wrote about be intentional with kind of, you know, eliminating distractions. You also mentioned the activity. I'm a big jump roper as well. I love jump roping. It's very cathartic. Like people
It
think of it
is.
as this very tough exercise, and it is tough. I mean, you get your blood flowing and pound, you know, like minute for minute, it's harder than running a mile. But I really enjoy it because you do get into a flow, you get into a rhythm, and then you can get better and better and go longer and longer. And I haven't thought about it from that perspective, that it does kind of calm you down. Mentioned push-ups too. I'm not an anxious person. When I first started my company, you know, you feel like everything's on the line. And so anxiety would be high when you're having calls. And I do recall like either listening to music, I would sometimes put on Wu-Tang Clan, some crazy stuff,
Yeah.
or do push-ups just to kind of like calm my body down, which is super interesting. And the meditating is something that I do currently, and I try to do it in the morning. My alarm rings at 5:50, but I get up at 6. And so I try to spend those 10 minutes just thinking about my day and honestly positive affirmations. Like I'm really
Yes.
try to get
Yes.
myself like, you're gonna have a good day, like, you know, like things are good, you're so busy, which I used to think of a negative, but now I'm trying to spin that like, you're so busy, that's actually a really good thing as an entrepreneur. You want to be busy, right? So
Yeah.
meditating, and the playlist is really interesting to me as well. So I appreciate those tidbits, and that makes sense. And like, how can people kind of incorporate a flow state into part of their routine? I mean, is this something that folks should maybe aspire to do daily, a couple times a day, weekly? Like to me, I equate flow state with like getting a body of work done, right?
Mhm.
Like working on content. I want to be in a flow state, locked in, focused. Like how can people start incorporating that? And can you do too many flow states? Like talk a little bit about kind of, you know, good potential good routine.
Yeah, really, I like to think of this as habit stacking. Like we have to understand that what we are striving towards, especially as entrepreneurs, our lifestyle changes, right? So that life is not so much, okay, now I'm getting ready to work, so therefore I have to get focused. If you think about it, we kind of want to be focused as much as we can, right? Even when we're doing something pleasurable. If I am having a conversation with a loved one, especially my 5-year-old son, I want to give him my full attention. I want to be present with him, right? And so, flow state is not something to achieve just from a working perspective. I like to think of it as, it's a goal for life, to the point where we're locked in, we're at our full attention, yet we're relaxed, right? We're also relaxed. And so small habit stacking, has really transformed my life. And what I mean by that, it started with when I would drive into the office. I had about an hour commute when I was going into the office, and I would usually get to the office really, really early. And so I would sit in my car, and I made this a habit. Every time I drove into the office in Alpharetta, Georgia, I would sit in my car and I would play a track. These are called binaural sounds.
I've
And
heard of
they're
it.
right. Yeah, they're just sounds. Again, we're trying to change our brain. We're trying to enact what they call neuroplasticity, which is really literally changing. Parts of your brain are growing in size, parts of your brain are shrinking in size. And when you do certain things, you're shrinking your amygdala, which is your stress response. That's the part of your brain that controls your fight or flight. You're shrinking that. and you're simultaneously, depending on the activity that you're doing, you're growing your prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that controls your decision making. And so again, you want to be doing things that put you in that state. And so obviously meditation, practicing being attentive, practicing just doing one thing at a time as much as you can, having cues. Something you said, I don't think it gets enough. I don't think we put enough emphasis on how important it is, which is affirmations. I think for many people, affirmations may still seem a little woo-woo. It may seem a little hokey, whatever word you choose to use to describe something that you just don't really understand, right? It's a really powerful, again, neurological thing that you're doing. This is why psychologists use affirmations, and it's embedded in spirituality. It's embedded in so many aspects of the way we already live. So the proof is there that it works, right? And literally what you're doing, the reason I think it's helpful to understand why we're doing these things. The reason that it's really important to listen to affirmations is because you're changing the subconscious programming, right? And remember, we have to remember that we are like glaciers, right? The majority of what we see is below the surface. And so we have to, the subconscious represents that which is below the surface. And so in order for us to change that, which is what is going to get to you changing your action, affirmations is an extremely powerful tool. So a habit that I found, I started doing this, I would say last year. So I've been doing this for about a year now, is when I go to sleep at night, I actually have a YouTube channel that has affirmations designed for nighttime. And they're just, you have different topics. Some are related to anxiety, some are related to self-love, some are related to manifesting money, right? Or changing your attitudes about money. I just play them. I set my TV timer for 15 minutes, so therefore the TV goes off at a certain time. And these are on like an 8-hour loop, and they're just positive affirmations. I do feel that I can make money effortlessly. I believe that I am, able to achieve my goals, really simple statements that we may not necessarily find time to do during the day, but we can set our lifestyle up so that we find that time, perhaps when we're sleeping. And again, you're working while you're asleep. You're creating efficient ways to bring these habits into your lifestyle so that when you get to work, I always like to say what the goal with a flow state, or really with life, is to make your work your rest and make your rest your work. When you look at it like that, when you're working, it doesn't feel like work, it feels like rest. And now you actually have a new attitude about rest. You prioritize it as if it's work. And when you see things like that, everything becomes really effortless in application.
Super interesting. And I'm a big believer about the positive affirmations as well.
Yeah.
My goal is to make it where I'm just a positive person throughout my workday. And it's hard for most people. And I think that's a good segue in a few moments to another question I have for you. I feel it's hard for a lot of people. And I've been working on that myself, is like, why would I not make my 9 to 5 like some of the happiest times? I spend 80% of my time working, right? So I'm a big believer in positive affirmations, and I use them myself, like before presentations and stuff like that. And I do feel like it has an effect. And one thing you brought up that's really interesting to me in particular, you mentioned the flow state and how, listening to your son and being in a flow state when you have a conversation with him. I've got 2 kids. I've got a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, 2 daughters, and they love to talk. And I feel I am far too distracted when I have conversations. And a lot of times it's work related. Other times it's not. Maybe I'm cooking. But one of the things that I've thought about in the last 2 to 3 months is how when they need my attention, I should give them 100% of my attention, because in 10 years from now, I'm going to be praying for their attention. You know what I mean? And so that really resonated with me. And that's something that I'm going to kind of try to utilize a flow state more on the personal side versus just business. And I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
And one thing I'll say about that too, we have to give ourselves grace as well, right? Because, our minds are, especially as entrepreneurs, we are constantly going. Like, I find myself oftentimes trying to do 5 different things at one time, even though my goal is to only be doing one. The reality is we still have to multitask. And sometimes my son is talking and chattering away and I'm not paying attention. So I show myself grace during those moments, and I don't beat myself up about it. But when I remember, when I notice that he really needs me to be focused on him, first step is to notice it. Right. Yeah. It's to, at some point, notice it, which is why we have the lifestyle habits, right? So that we can activate that awareness easily. When you notice it, you just lock in for as long as you can. and you do the best you can every single moment. You give yourself grace because none of us are perfect. And the more you sort of are intentional about seeing it that way, the more they will pick up those habits as well.
No, I think that's super interesting, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. So let's talk about the kind of the remote world and mindfulness and flow state. And I feel like COVID rocked everybody's world. And honestly, I hadn't heard more about mental health and the importance thereof, or how big of a deal it is, especially in the US, since COVID. Like, I mean, I feel like people didn't really talk about it. Then COVID happened, and then everybody kind of realized that, like, we're in this together. Like, most people aren't happy during this period of time. Like, how big of a deal is mindfulness in a remote setting? And, what could companies do to kind of create I guess, a more mindful type of culture for their employees, so they don't feel like they're an island, and completely isolated and on their
Yeah.
own?
Yeah, organizations really have to be intentional about creating community, not creating, but sort of making sure that there is space for community. And you're right, I've actually worked remotely for about 10 years. So prior to the pandemic, I was working remotely, and it can be very lonely. For someone like me who kind of likes to be alone, I don't mind being in that environment. It's still, you have to, it requires a level of intentionality that we don't really think about, meaning when you're in the office, you are naturally surrounded by other people. So when you're at home, you have to be intentional about getting outside, about, having coffee chats, virtual or real, working in different spaces. And so, and a lot of that is individual. But I think organizations would really do themselves a major advantage by investing in mindfulness programs, meaning programs, and I offer one, through Mindful Culture Creators. I teach, primarily in corporate spaces. I teach people how to develop mindful work habits. For remote work specifically, it's around, again, everything that we're talking about, really, having those, giving people the empowerment, and sort of even using words like, I give myself permission, sort of having these cues for your employees. I give myself permission to put my phone in another room. I give myself permission to turn my notifications off for 1 hour so that I could really get this task done without distraction. And I think as adults, we need those adult permission slips. And so in one of my classes that I teach, that's what we do at the end of the class. We all sign an adult permission slip, and everyone writes in the thing that they're giving themselves permission to do. And I've even done it with teams, right? For leaders to just sort of say that, I give my team permission to not be on Zoom, right? To not be on video. If you don't feel comfortable being on video, if it causes you anxiety. So, sort of being intentional about giving them the permission to have that empowerment and autonomy, because we take for granted that people are just empowered, right? One of the things that COVID taught us is that there is a lot, as you said, there is a lot of mental stress and anxiety that exists in the world. It existed before COVID. COVID exacerbated it, and it brought the solution to the surface, which is an amazing thing, because now mindfulness is not something that organizations and individuals shy away from. We're seeing the connection. We're seeing how it was always in whatever faith you have. There is some level of mindfulness in that faith if you choose to practice spirituality. If you believe more in science, well, science has a way to explain mindfulness. If you believe in more sociology and more social ways of living, well, that has ways to explain mindfulness. And we're seeing that connection. Plus, we're seeing the data that tells us the benefit of it, from the perspective of getting people, again, shifting the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex so that we can achieve our results as organizations. So investing in mindfulness programs is a way to actually activate your strategy. It's a way to actually activate your people being emotionally connected to themselves, so that when you introduce this big change, right? When you introduce this big change that may be, we're ending remote work and we're actually wanting our employees to go back into the office, perhaps your employees are not so emotionally triggered by that. Perhaps now they have the tools to actually sit with that emotion, vocalize it, and then get, perhaps change a thought, perhaps change, go from being anxious to accepting, from being stressed to adapting, right? And getting to resilience. But I think organizations take for granted that people are just going to get there. No, in our state, people need to be taught these things. And so investing in programs like mine is a really good way to do that.
I think that's super interesting, and I agree. So I've worked remote for, I think, 16, maybe 16 and a half, 17 years. And it's not for everybody. And I feel it was a shock to the system for a lot of folks that had a traditional 9 to 5, because now all of a sudden you're going to this environment where there's not really many guardrails, but then there's like the ultimate guardrails, because, like, work and life kind of like amalgamate, and it's
Yep.
really difficult because there's no separation of church and state. Like it's like you're available all the time. And I think the hardest thing that most folks struggle with is working too much, honestly. And I love the thought about the adult permission slip. And I try to do that with myself as well. You've got to set, barriers, parameters, what have you. Like, for me, walking the dog. If I'm going to jump on a Zoom and somebody's not going to use their video, well, then you need to call my cell phone because I'm
Yep.
not going to be anchored to my desk,
Yeah. Yeah.
stuck to my computer to have a phone call with you if you can't turn your video on.
Yep.
And again, I don't care either way, but I think, having rules, and like big thing for me is I don't take lunch breaks, and I try to take lunch breaks. And so now I try to carve out 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes where I read mindfulness or do something that breaks me away from work. So you're not working. And I feel like far too many people with the remote situation, they literally just work the entire time. And then the bosses actually get a more productive employee, so they're not telling them to calm down and stop contributing. So it's a really tough environment, especially for people that haven't worked at home as long as you and me. Like I know what to do. I know when I'm being overutilized and I need to walk away, and I'll go hit golf balls or do something else because I just got to take a break. And also too, then you have the more junior employees who feel like I've got to be tethered to my desk 24/7 on Slack, on instant message, because my boss may message me. They may say see the away icon on your instant message. So I think, if companies could, provide some grace, to use your word, from that perspective, and maybe reinforce that some of this behavior is fine. And if you need a mental break, for God's sakes, take one.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And I think organizations have to understand, what is the goal, right? Because we do have leaders that, that do micromanage, right? We do have leaders that manage to your availability and your status on instant messaging tools. Those types of leaders do exist. And if you are the employee being managed by that type of leader, the reason mindfulness and meditation is so important is because it helps you cultivate courage. Because the reason that employees don't actually set boundaries, boundaries that are in alignment with their role. So I'm not talking about, taking a boundary to where you just take a 5-hour nap during the day, right?
Yeah.
Boundaries that are in alignment with your role and being successful in that role. The employees that don't do that, they're doing it because they're afraid. They're doing it. I mean, it's very simple, right? We overcomplicate this. They're afraid that they're going to get in trouble. They're afraid that their brand is going to be damaged. They're afraid of a reputation that is now everyone's going to be thinking I'm insert, the phrase, right? Everyone's going to think. We're so concerned about how others are going to perceive us that we stop actually living in our authenticity. And that is the thing that is going to allow you to achieve the greatest results. So if you are the employee that is struggling with courage, well, enter the spaces that allow you to cultivate courage. Get with the communities that help you, that pull you out of that fear so that you can transition. I always like to say in life, we're always moving in and out of survival mode and into thrive mode. And you want to be in thrive mode as much as you can, understanding that every now and then you will be in survival mode. But if you spend your whole life in survival mode, you'll get the results of someone that spends their whole life in survival mode.
And it's a miserable existence. I mean, really, like
it's
kind of look over your shoulder, worried, concerned. I mean, literally is the exact opposite of where I personally aspire to be. And that's, glass is half full, right? Or whatever. So anyways, so Shawnta, how can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Shawnta, Shawnta Hooks, MBA, CPA. But if you just search my name, you'll find me on LinkedIn. I share a lot of content on LinkedIn around, how to incorporate mindfulness into your workday. Also on Instagram, Shawnta the Speaker, because I am a speaker as well. I give keynotes that incorporate mindfulness and meditation, not just from a speaking perspective, but an actual practice perspective. So you can find me on Instagram, and my website is mindfulculturecreators.com. And stay in touch so that you can hear about some of the free events that I typically host throughout the month.
That's awesome. We'll be sure to add some links to the podcast. Truly appreciate the discussion, appreciate the time, and sincerely, I know you're going to crush it out there on the stage. This is the timing is now for all this stuff. And I think it's great. So continue to do what you're doing. And thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.